Hi everybody, this is Coach International Master Roderick Nava, and today we're gonna talk about the game happened between Super Grandmaster Andrei Esipenko of Russia versus Super Grandmaster Jordan van Foreest of Netherlands. So Esipenko played e4 here, and then Jordan played e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, Gyoko piano, and then knight f6, now d3 simply to protect the e4 pawn, and then now bishop c5. So this structure belongs to the main line of Gyoko piano. And then now knight c3, so to control the d5 square more, and then h6 prophylactic move to protect the g5 square by playing bishop g5 or knight g5 in the future for white. Then bishop e3, challenging early the dark squared bishop, and Jordan simply responds with bishop b6, waiting for white to capture on b6. And then now Esipenko played knight d5, centralizing his strong knight. And then now d6 to give way for the light squared bishop development, and h3 prophylactic move to avoid knight g4 or even annoying bishop g4 pin. And then bishop takes e3, Jordan decided to capture the bishop, f takes e3, knight a5 hitting the bishop on c4, and then knight takes f6 check, queen takes f6, bishop b3, and then knight takes b3, a takes b3 of course to have a tempo control on the a file, and then simply castle, queen e7, and preparing to play f5 at some point, and then now queen e1, transferring the queen there to g3 or on h4. Then now black played f5, e takes f5, rook takes f5, queen b4. So what's the idea of queen b4? So to prevent the black's development of light squared bishop due to defending the b7 pawn, and then now c5 with tempo attack, and then queen e4 centralizing the queen, bishop e6 develop, and then now knight h4 attacking the rook on f5. Then rook g5 was played, so he moved away a little bit because if black would take the rook on f1, then simply rook takes f1, then sooner or later white will dominate the square g6 and also the f file control. So that's why Jordan decided to play rook g5, and with the plan of bishop takes h3 coming, and then now queen f3 protecting the h3 pawn, and a6, now e4, and then rook d8, so trying to break on d5 maybe, and then now rook f2, so preparing to play rook a f1, triple battery control on the f file, then king h7, king h2 prophylactic also, and then queen c7, queen e2, a5, and then rook a f1, battery on the f file, and b5. So Jordan prepares to launch an attack on c4 to break on c4 maybe. So here rook f8, challenging the rook, then a4, b takes a4, b takes a4, and then now c4. So to close the center and also to prevent the black's coming c4, very strong breakthrough. So white played c4 here, and then queen e7. So Jordan forced the rook on f8 to capture on d8. But then Esipenko decided to play queen f3 to support the rook on f8, and then bishop g8. Of course, if black would take the rook on f8, then simply queen takes f8, queen takes f8, rook takes f8. The big problem for black here is if you realize the rook on g5 is nothing to do. So it is totally very close to trap. So while the white rook can simply play rook d8, smashing the pawns d6, and also the a4. Alright, so those are the coming plans if black would take the rook simply on f8. So that's why Jordan decided to play bishop g8, a waiting move, and rook takes d8, queen takes d8, and then now queen f8, forcing black to exchange the queen. But then Jordan runs out with queen a5, and then rook f2, so Esipenko protects the d2 that black queen can launch an attack there, and then bishop e6, rook e2, waiting move, a3, so b takes a3, queen takes a3, and then now Jordan sacrificed the pawn on d6, so bishop takes c4, so that is Jordan's plan here, and then now d takes c4, queen g3 check, king h1, then queen takes h4. But then Esipenko took the advantage with an extra pawn, queen takes c5, queen f4, queen e3, Queen f1 check, king h2, and then rook g6, then c5. White produced a very strong pass pawn here in c-file, and then now rook c6, rook c2, supports the c5 pass pawn, and then now queen d1, hitting the rook on c2, queen f2, simply to protect the rook, and then queen d3, attacking the e4 pawn, and then now queen f5 check, rook g6. Why not simply place king h8? Because of queen takes e5. Alright, so even though white rook is hanging, but then white has queen e8 check, then after king h7, then simply queen takes c6 or queen takes rook, then white gains the decisive advantage, and sooner or later black will resign. Alright, so let's go back. After queen f5 check, that's why Jordan decided to play rook g6, cover the check, and then rook f2. And now queen c3 by Jordan, attacking the c5 pawn, at the same time protecting the e5 pawn. But then we can see the evaluation bar gives a big plus for white side. Why? Because better was, instead of playing queen c3, better was queen g3 check here. Then after king h1, then queen e3. So white couldn't play c5 here because of queen c1 check, king h2, then queen takes c6. Even though white has queen takes e5, but then simply black plays rook g5 here, then let's say rook f5, and then rook g6. So black has a lot of options here to hold in this position. So let's go back. That's why here, queen g3 was better, but then Jordan played queen c3, then now rook f3, a very good move by Esipenko. So queen takes c5, a very strong move, h4. It follows with h5, winning the rook, and then h5, forcing to play that move, and then rook g3, queen d6 to support the rook, and then now rook g5, attacking the h5 pawn. So for the meantime, the king on h7 is in zugzwang. So queen c6, g3, then queen a6, king h3, queen c6, and then now rook takes h5 check, king g8, and then queen takes e5. So white has an extra 2 pawns, and then rook d6, queen c5, offering an exchange of queens, but queen d7 check, queen f5 cover, then rook e6, queen d5, now queen takes d5, rook takes d5. So queen takes d5 is forced, because if queen e7, like for example, then white has rook e5, attacking the rook on e6 and forcing the exchange. So let's go back. That's why Jordan captured the queen, then e takes d5, rook e4, and then rook g5, then rook d4 to stop the progress of the pass pawn, and then now h5, planning to play h6, attacking the g7. So rook d3, king h4, king f7, then rook f5 check, and here Jordan resigns the game. Why? Because if, like for example, if black goes back with king g8, then white could simply play g4, then followed with king g5, then rook e5, then king f5, king e6, then slowly progress the pawn with d6, d7 until promotion. So totally hopeless for white. So that's all for the game between Super Grandmaster Andrei Esipenko and Super Grandmaster Jordan van Foreest, one of the trainer of world champion Magnus Carlsen from the last World Chess Championship against Nepomniachtchi of Russia. Once again, thank you very much for your time watching this video, and I hope you learned from this. And if you haven't subscribed yet in our YouTube channel, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell all to get you more updates in our coming new videos. Once again, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.